I've replayed that moment 1,000 times in my mind. The way Diane stood up from her chair. The way she smoothed her blazer with both hands. Like she was preparing to give a speech she'd been rehearsing for years. The way she pointed at me across the conference table and said, "In front of my children. In front of Harold's entire family. In front of the man who had been our family attorney for 2 decades. That document is a forgery. And she is a liar." The room went absolutely silent. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just looked at her. And then I looked at Walter Greer, our attorney, and I said, as calmly as I have ever said anything in my life, "Walter, would you please open the second envelope?" And that was when everything changed. But to understand what happened in that room, you need to understand who Harold was. And who his family was. And who they had always believed I was. My name is Rosalind Carmichael. Roz, to anyone who actually knows me. I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, the second of 4 daughters raised by a schoolteacher and a man who fixed air conditioning units for a living. We weren't poor, exactly. But we understood the difference between wanting something and having it. I became a schoolteacher myself. 4th grade, 22 years. Brentwood Elementary in Nashville. I loved that job the way some people love religion. Completely. Without reservation. With a kind of faith that never quite left me even on the hard days. I met Harold Carmichael at a school fundraiser in the fall of 1991. He had shown up with his business partner to donate supplies for the classroom auction. And he had gotten separated from his partner somewhere near the gymnasium doors and ended up at my table, looking slightly lost and slightly amused about it. "I think I'm supposed to be somewhere else," he said, picking up one of the paper turkeys my students had made. "But I have to be honest, these are better than anything in the other room." He was 41. I was 34. He was the founder and majority owner of Carmichael Logistics, a freight and supply chain company that had grown from a single warehouse in Murfreesboro into a regional operation with 12 facilities across 4 states. He was, by any measure that his family cared about, a significant man. What his family didn't know, what they never really understood, was that Harold Carmichael didn't care about any of that. He cared about the paper turkeys. He cared about the children who made them. He cared about the woman sitting at that table who could tell you the learning style, the home situation, and the specific mathematical anxiety of every single child in her classroom. We talked for 3 hours that night. About education and community and what it actually meant to build something worth keeping. He asked for my phone number before he left and called the very next morning. Apologizing for calling so early. Not apologizing at all. We were married 14 months later. Small ceremony. Just family and close friends. At the Botanical Garden in Nashville in December. His family attended. They smiled in the photographs. But I knew, even then, that the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Harold's family was old Nashville money. Not ancient money. Not generational wealth going back centuries. But the kind of money that had been around long enough that the people holding it had forgotten what it felt like to not have it. His mother, Eleanor Carmichael, was 73 when we married. A formidable woman. Silver hair. Perfect posture. The kind of voice that had never needed to be raised to command a room. She had wanted Harold to marry Patricia Hensley, the daughter of one of his father's old business associates. Patricia was appropriate. Patricia had the right background. Patricia understood what it meant to be a Carmichael wife. I was not Patricia. Eleanor never said anything overtly unkind to me. She was too refined for that. But she had a gift for the particular cruelty of polite dismissal. The way she would ask me questions at family dinners that were clearly designed to highlight what I didn't know, what I hadn't done, where I hadn't been. Have you ever been to Tuscany, Rosalind? No? Oh, well, someday, perhaps. Harold's sister Diane was worse. In the way that younger people are often worse than their parents. Less practiced at hiding it. Diane was Harold's only sibling. 7 years younger. And she had grown up understanding that Carmichael Logistics would be her financial safety net regardless of what she personally contributed to it. She had a lifestyle that required significant upkeep. A house in Belmead. A daughter in private school. A husband who was handsome and charming and almost completely useless in a business sense. And all of that upkeep depended, in one way or another, on Harold's continued generosity. For 31 years, Harold was generous. He helped Diane's husband when his consulting firm struggled. He paid for his niece Amber's tuition when the private school increased its fees. He quietly settled 2 separate financial disputes that would have been deeply embarrassing to the family if they'd become public. He never once asked for gratitude. He never held it over anyone. That was Harold. And Diane, who had received all of that generosity, who had benefited from Harold's quiet decency for 3 decades, repaid him by spending 31 years waiting for him to die, so she could have access to everything he'd built. I watched it happen in slow motion. The way she positioned herself as the family historian, the keeper of Carmichael legacy, the one who truly understood what the family name meant. The way she slowly rewrote the story of Harold's marriage. Not to his face. Never to his face. But to cousins and family friends and anyone who would listen. Roz never really fit in. Harold deserved someone who understood his world. She was fine. Of course, perfectly nice. But you know how these things go. I heard it. I always heard it. Harold heard it too. He just chose, for the sake of family peace, not to make it a battlefield. I respected that about him even when it frustrated me. Harold and I had a good marriage. Not a perfect one. No marriage is perfect. But a real one. We had 2 sons, Marcus and Daniel, born 4 years apart, both of whom grew up understanding the value of honest work and genuine kindness because those were the things their father modeled every single day. We built a life together in the truest sense of that phrase. Not me folding myself into Harold's existing life, but both of us creating something new that belonged to us equally. I continued teaching until Marcus was born. Then took a few years away. Then returned part-time when the boys were in school. When I finally retired from the classroom, I threw myself into the literacy nonprofit Harold and I had started together. Reading First Nashville, which provided tutoring and book access to children in underfunded schools across the metro area. That nonprofit was the project of my heart. 12 years of building it from a small volunteer program into an organization with a paid staff, a permanent office, and partnerships with 14 different school districts. Harold funded it generously. But more than the money. He showed up. He came to the fundraisers. He read to kids at the Saturday programs. He told anyone who would listen that Reading First was the most important thing the Carmichael family had ever put its name on. Diane thought it was a vanity project. She made that clear in her particular way. Always framed as concern. Always with a smile. I just worry that you're spreading yourself too thin. Roz. Harold works so hard. He deserves a wife who's present at home. Harold would squeeze my hand under the dinner table when she said things like that. His way of telling me, without words, that he saw exactly what she was doing. Harold was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in the spring of 2018. He was 68 years old. Still sharp and funny and deeply engaged with his business and his community. But the tremor in his right hand had gotten bad enough that he couldn't hide it anymore. And the neurologist was direct about what the coming years would look like. He handled it the way he handled everything. With quiet dignity. With humor. With a refusal to let fear drive any decision he made. He also handled it with meticulous preparation. What I didn't know, what he never told me, was that 2 weeks after his diagnosis, Harold had gone to Walter Greer's office alone, and spent an entire afternoon reorganizing his estate plan. He updated his will, yes. But he also did something else. Something I wouldn't learn about until the day of the reading, 2 years after he passed. Harold died in January of 2023. He had lived 5 years with Parkinson's. 5 years of gradual losses managed with grace and stubbornness and the love of people who refused to let him diminish. I was with him at the end. Our sons on either side of the bed, his hand in mine. The room quiet except for the sound of his breathing growing slower. He looked at me before he closed his eyes for the last time. Just looked at me. And smiled. I think about that smile every single day. The will reading was scheduled for 6 weeks after the funeral. Walter Greer's office. Downtown Nashville. 10th floor of a building that looked out over the Cumberland River. I arrived with Marcus and Daniel. Diane arrived with her husband, Clifton, and their daughter Amber. Eleanor had passed 2 years before Harold, so she was not there, which was its own kind of mercy, I thought, given what was about to happen. There were also 2 of Harold's cousins present, Gerald and Patrice, who had been named as minor beneficiaries in previous versions of the will. And there was Diane's family attorney, a man named Brent Holloway, who had apparently been invited, or invited himself, to observe the proceedings. That should have told me something. A family attorney in the room before anyone knows what the will says. But I was still in grief fog. Still carrying Harold's absence like a physical weight on my chest. I sat down across from Diane and Clifton, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. Walter Greer opened the proceedings with the standard language. The date of the document. The confirmation that Harold James Carmichael had been of sound mind and body at the time of signing. The formal identification of all parties present. Then he began reading. Harold had structured his estate thoughtfully and generously. The cousins received bequests as promised. Amber received a trust fund for her graduate education. Reading First Nashville received a significant endowment, enough to fund operations for 25 years, which made my throat tighten so badly I had to press my lips together to hold myself steady. And then Walter reached the primary disposition of assets. Harold's majority stake in Carmichael Logistics, the controlling interest in the company he had built from one warehouse into a regional enterprise, was to be placed into a family trust, with Rosalind Carmichael as the sole trustee, with Marcus and Daniel as successor trustees upon her death or incapacitation. The family home, the house in Green Hills that Harold and I had bought together in 1995, where we had raised our sons, where we had built 30 years of ordinary and extraordinary life, was left to me outright. Diane received a cash bequest, generous by any normal standard, but a fraction of what she had apparently expected, and a smaller stake in the company with no governance rights. The silence that followed was different from the silence that had preceded it. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in pressure in the room. The way Diane's stillness became something coiled and dangerous. Clifton put his hand on her arm. She shook him off. "That's not right," she said, her voice very controlled. "That cannot be the current document." Walter looked up over his reading glasses. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "That's not the current document." Diane's voice was climbing now. The control slipping. "Harold updated his will 18 months before he died. I know he did. We discussed it." "Ms. Holloway," Walter said patiently, using her married name. "This document is dated November 2021 and is the most recent version on file with this office. It supersedes all previous versions." Then it was changed. Diane stood up. She smoothed her blazer with both hands. And she pointed at me. She changed it. Harold was deteriorating by 2021. His cognition was affected. He would never have voluntarily structured his estate this way. Giving her total control over everything he built. That document is a forgery. And she is a liar. The room was a held breath. I felt Marcus tense beside me. Daniel put his hand on the table, steady and quiet, the way Harold used to. I looked at Diane. I looked at the fury in her face, the years of resentment finally boiling over into open accusation. I looked at Brent Holloway, her attorney, who was already reaching for his briefcase with the practiced calm of a man who had been waiting for his cue. And I felt, underneath the shock and the grief and the indignation, something else. Certainty. Because Harold had prepared for this. I didn't know exactly how. But I knew, in the way you know things about a person after 31 years of loving them, that Harold had seen this moment coming. And he had not left me unprotected. I turned to Walter Greer. Walter, I said, my voice completely calm. Would you please open the second envelope? Walter reached into the leather portfolio in front of him and withdrew a sealed envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy stock, sealed with a strip of red wax that bore the impression of Walter's own notary seal. Handwritten on the front in Harold's unmistakable script, which had become smaller and more careful in his final years but was still absolutely his, were the words, "To be opened in the event that the validity of my estate plan is challenged." Diane went very still. "What is that?" she said. Her voice had lost its certainty. "This," Walter said, breaking the wax seal with a letter opener, "is a document your brother placed in my safekeeping in October of 2018, 2 weeks after his diagnosis, with specific instructions that it be held sealed until either his death without challenge, in which case it would be destroyed unopened, or a challenge to the validity of his estate plan was raised, in which case it was to be opened immediately, in the presence of all parties. 12 years ago. No. 5 years ago. But it had been sitting there, waiting, sealed under wax, for exactly this moment. Harold had known. Even in the early days of his diagnosis. Even when Parkinson's was still just a word and a tremor in one hand. He had looked ahead and seen his sister clearly. He had loved her anyway. And he had protected me from her. Walter unfolded the document inside and began to read. It was Harold's voice. Every word of it. He had written a detailed personal statement, notarized, witnessed by 2 independent parties, with a contemporaneous video recording also sealed with Walter and referenced in the document, explaining in precise and deliberate language exactly why he had structured his estate the way he had. He described his own cognitive state at the time of writing, including a neurological evaluation conducted that same week confirming his full decision-making capacity. He described the specific reasons for each major decision in his will. He described his genuine love for Diane and his hope that she would eventually understand his choices. And then he addressed the possibility that she might not. I love my sister, Walter read, his voice quieter now, careful with the words. I have loved her my entire life and I have never stopped believing she is capable of more generosity than she typically chooses to practice. But I also know her well enough to know that if my estate plan does not meet her expectations, she will find a way to challenge it. She will question my capacity. She will question my wife's integrity. She will do whatever it takes to get what she believes she is owed. I am writing this letter to make one thing absolutely clear. Rosalind Carmichael is the finest person I have ever known. She has given me 30 years of genuine partnership, genuine love, and genuine grace in the face of treatment she never deserved from people who should have valued her from the beginning. Every decision in my estate plan reflects my considered, uninfluenced, fully competent wishes. If anyone suggests otherwise, they are wrong. And this letter, and the recording that accompanies it, will make that unmistakably clear. Walter lowered the document. The room was completely silent. Diane was sitting down. I wasn't sure when she had sat down. Her face was the color of old paper. Clifton was staring at his hands. Brent Holloway, the family attorney who had been waiting for his cue, was very quietly putting papers back into his briefcase. Marcus let out a long, slow breath beside me. Daniel reached over and put his hand over mine on the table. I didn't cry. I had cried enough in the past 6 weeks to last me a long time. Instead, I felt something settle inside me. A kind of deep, aching gratitude that moved through me like warm water. Harold. Even at the end. Even after everything. Still protecting me. Diane didn't speak for a very long time. When she finally did, her voice was different from any voice I had heard from her in 31 years of knowing her. Smaller. Something cracked in it. He knew, she said quietly. Not to me. Not to anyone really. Just to herself. He knew exactly what I would do. And he still. She didn't finish the sentence. I didn't finish it for her either. But I knew what she was feeling. Because it was the same thing I was feeling. From a completely different direction. Harold had known exactly what Diane would do. And he had loved her enough to prepare for it without punishing her for it. He hadn't written her out of his estate in anger. He hadn't exposed her to legal jeopardy. He had simply made sure that the truth was on record, sealed under wax, waiting for the moment it was needed. That was Harold. Even his protection was an act of love. The weeks that followed were difficult in the ordinary ways that legal and financial transitions are difficult. Paperwork, meetings with the business's management team, decisions about the structure of the trust. Marcus, who had been working in the company for 8 years, stepped into a more active leadership role with the confidence of someone who had been prepared for exactly this moment. Diane did not pursue a legal challenge. Brent Holloway, I later heard, had advised her strongly against it given the existence of the recorded statement. She called me 3 months after the reading. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought about Harold's voice in that document. I have loved her my entire life. And I picked up. I owe you an apology, Diane said. Her voice still had that different quality to it. Smaller, cracked open. I owe you 31 years of apologies. Probably. But I'll start with the one from the lawyer's office. I sat with it for a moment. I accept it, I said finally. I don't know what we're going to be to each other going forward. But I accept it. There was a long silence. He loved you so much, Diane said, and her voice broke on the last word. He loved you in a way that made the rest of us feel, I don't know, small. And I think I resented you for it instead of learning from it. I'm sorry, Roz. I thanked her. I didn't tell her everything was fine. It wasn't fine. Not entirely. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something. A year after the reading. Reading First Nashville held its annual gala. It was our biggest event since Harold's passing. 400 people. A venue downtown. A program that featured children from 6 different schools reading their own original work on a real stage with a real microphone. I stood at the back of the room and watched a 9-year-old girl from a school in Antioch read a poem she had written about her grandmother. Her voice was clear and steady and completely unafraid. And the room was absolutely silent as she read. The way rooms go silent when something true is happening in them. Diane was there. She had called to ask if she could come. And I had said yes. She stood near the back too, a little apart from the crowd. And when the girl finished her poem and the room erupted in applause, I looked over and saw Diane with her hand pressed to her chest, crying quietly. She caught me looking. And she nodded. I nodded back. After the program ended and the guests were mingling over dinner, Marcus found me near the dessert table and put his arm around my shoulders. Dad would have loved tonight, he said. He did love it, I said. Every version of it he got to see. And I think this one. I think he would have said this one was the best. Marcus tightened his arm around me. We stood there for a moment, watching the room, watching the children who were still buzzing with excitement near the stage, watching the guests who had come to support something Harold had believed in with his whole heart. He protected you, Marcus said quietly. Even at the end. He made sure you were protected. He always did, I said. I just didn't always know the shape it would take. I still keep Harold's letter in the drawer of my nightstand. Not the official notarized version. That one is in a safety deposit box at the bank. But Walter made me a copy. And I have read it so many times that I could recite most of it from memory. Rosalind Carmichael is the finest person I have ever known. Some nights when the house is quiet and his absence is loudest, I take it out and read those words again. And it feels, just for a moment, like hearing his voice. Some people spend their lives waiting to be seen. Waiting for the right person to look at them clearly, without agenda, without expectation, and say, I see exactly who you are. And I choose you. Harold Carmichael chose me every single day for 31 years. And on the day it mattered most, he chose me again. And that was just the beginning. Because what happened next? 3 months after that gala, when a letter arrived from Harold's attorneys with information I never expected, I never saw coming. Subscribe, so you don't miss what comes next.